bananas, oranges, grapes. Strawberries sometimes. Blueberries.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Could I ask you, just before we start the meeting, if we could just stand for a minute's silence to remember all those who have died in terrorist atrocities in the recent times, and also people who have lost their lives in yesterday's last night's tragic events. Thank you. Thank you very much. The first item on the agenda is the evacuation procedure, and the fire drill is not expected, so if the alarm sounds, please evacuate the building quickly and calmly using the stairs and not the lifts. Once out of the building, please gather outside the Yorkshire Bank on the opposite side of the road. Please enter by the door in which you came in, which is exit by the door which you came in, which is clearly marked as fire exit. And if you need any assistance, please make yourself known to a member of staff. And could we ask that all mobile phones are turned off or set to silent? And I would advise you that the meeting that may be partially or completely recorded for future broadcast. Second item is apologies, and there have been no apologies from members of the Cabinet. Third item, declarations of interest. Are there any which have not been listed? No, thank you very much. Fourth item is minutes, to confirm the minutes of the Cabinet meeting held on the 24th of May. Is it agreed I sign these as a true and correct record? Fifth item is public consultation. We have, on item 6, we have Councillor Kondarka and Michelle Kondarka. On item 7, we've got Councillor Kondarka. On item 8, we've got Councillor Kondarka, Councillor Wilson and Councillor Margrave. On item 12, we have Councillor Kondarka and Councillor Wilson, although obviously that will then be held in private session. So could I ask on item 6 then, Councillor Kondarka, please.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, Cabinet. This document contains lots of financial information about the year that's just ended. Obviously, lots of things haven't been finished or progressed like they're supposed to have been, and there's lots of information that is worrying in the Council's performance on some of its capital programmes and slippages. Obviously in here is the depot, which is there's been a massive overspend on. There's also the cricket club mentioned in here, which is a project that's been delayed, but I understand it's also not going to be properly completed. So we rushed into this project as an emergency item on a council meeting. You must approve this, you must approve this. And now we find out that it's being slipped back into next year, and who knows how much of it will be completed. We also have on here the Borough Connectivity Project, another one that just says this has been reprofiled, and yet, is it going ahead? What's happening to that money? And the other thing that always needs a bit of a review is all our variances. Our car parking, £250,000 out, we're on car parking. We are only actually surviving as a council because we're being so promiscuous to planners. We're planning applications. We're getting so many planning applications coming in now, we're making a massive surplus on planning. which is actually undoing the massive losses we're doing on parking. We really need to do a better job of forecasting and putting this council into a more sound and permanently sound financial situation. And you just look at this list of failures we've had on all sorts of projects, all sorts of things carried forward to next year, all sorts of projections out by considerable factors. One does despair of this council, and we do not have proper scrutiny of this stuff. Budgets are not really scrutinised because you have the budget, and 2 hours later, the budget here, 2 hours later, is discussed at the full council. At the county council, lots of issues, but at least things are more robust. Budgets are generated over a far longer period, and estimates are far more accurate. And one final thing, what is Vale Farm refurbishment? It keeps on getting rolled on, yet another project that seems to be going nowhere. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Condoka. Any questions? Thank you very much. Michelle Condoka.
Thank you. I really want to talk about the things on Appendix A on page 26, because those were the things that leapt out at me. I am only a member of the public, but I'm gradually learning more and more about how the council runs. The first thing was sports development. 30,000 in effect, in profit because of reduced staffing costs due to vacancies. Now, from what I can make out, this is vacancies to the climbing wall, because I know you've been advertising for the jobs, because the people who took them don't seem to have stayed for whatever reason. We never find out sort of the whys and the wherefores. So I think the climbing wall needs to be seriously looked at. It has just been a massive black hole for money going in. We've spent out the money, we've not got the staff, it's not going out. It would have been a wonderful thing to have had at the Gala Field for the carnival on Saturday. Loads of people down there, nothing to be seen. And the reduced car park income, again, this keeps coming forward at each of the, I think it's quarterly when you do these things, and we're not getting any better on it. But what concerns me is that I never see anything in any of the council papers and things about what's being done to try and overcome this problem and things. And it is something that really bothers me as a member of the public, because you never get a chance to actually ask about these things. You tell us we're not allowed to ask questions here at Cabinet. We're only allowed to ask questions at full council. And you're allowed one question. So there are 4 things that have cropped up on here that I would like to ask questions about. I can only ask one, and if that's not answered satisfactorily to my view, I have no comeback on saying, well, actually, I don't agree with this, or what about this, because there are never any secondary questions, and there's never any opportunity to, as a member of the public, to actually question these things. So the democracy is nowhere to be seen. The other thing that sprung out was the borough plan, underspend on salaries, 81,000. And yet we were told that there weren't that many consultation events and things, because, it costs money to have the staff there, it costs money to hire venues and such like and things. There's all this money that had been allocated that wasn't used. And, again, where's the democracy in it? Reduce spend on economic growth delivery. That, again, is absolutely vital. We need to be trying to, improve things, get growth, get development of the town centre and things. And 23,000 that, should have been spent and hasn't been. So those are the main things that, sprang out to me.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Thank you very much. Right, so if we turn to page 15 for agenda item 6, the report sets out the final outturn position for the General Fund, HRA and capital programmes for 2016-17. The General Fund outturn position is a slightly reduced contribution to reserves of £6,000. Full details are shown in Appendix A. As part of the final account process, the Council's earmark reserves are reviewed to ensure they remain at an acceptable and prudent level. A breakdown of the Council's reserves at the 31st of March is given at section 4. and Appendix B, and Cabinet are asked to approve these balances. The final outturn on the HRA for 2016-17 is an increased surplus of 390,000, which is largely due to salary and contract savings. Further details on HRA variances for the year are given in Appendix C. The overall surplus on the HRA will be used to support the business plan in future years. A summary of the capital programme for the General Fund or HRA are given at Appendix D. There has been some slippage on the capital programme for the General Fund, and spend has been reprofiled into 2017-18 where appropriate. Cabinet are therefore asked to approve revised capital programmes for 2017-18, shown at Appendix D prior to submitting to Council. The Council is required to complete its statement of accounts for 2016-17 before the end of June, and these have been finalised well ahead of the deadline. External audit of our accounts begins in July, and the recommendations to the report are shown at section 2. Just before we go, if ask any other member, I will never apologise for us making savings over and above those we were expected, because that is the way we try to keep the council tax down and to keep the finances of this borough at a reasonable level. We are facing enormous cuts, further cuts to our budget in future years, and any savings that have been made are to be welcomed. Any other member? Councillor Lloyd.
Yeah, just a couple of things. Certainly, obviously, I'm in favour of the report. Just on the cricket club, I'm completely miffed on why a councillor should say it's been put back to next year. There's been slippage and etc. etc. If the councillor wants to go for a walk in Bedworth Park, you'll see that the work has started well in advance, and it's going on. And I think, you know, the cricket club, I've said it previously, keeps having a go at them, but I've said it previously, I think it will be a flagship for this borough, and it's something that we can use as a template right across the borough when introducing new sporting facilities or improving sporting facilities. On the, I think you've touched on the savings chair reference. Any savings that are made are welcome, whether it be through staff savings or other savings. It is welcome with the amount of money we've got to save year on year. But yeah, just go and have a walk in the park, Councillor Condicura. I know it's in Bedworth, but go and have a walk in the park and you'll see it.
I was there yesterday and work was progressing very well, so I'm very pleased to see it.
You can't miss it.
Any other member? No, thank you very much. So we agreed with the recommendations?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Agenda item 7 then, we've got Councillor Conductor.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, welfare reform is an area where I've actually got more sympathy with the Labour position. These welfare reforms are doing massive damage to our borough and are effectively siphoning out money from the people who can least afford it. We really have an issue with the bedroom tax affecting people's ability to stay in flats and rent flats, so we have empty flats which should be used because we can't efficiently manage our resources. And there's all sorts of other problems caused by this government's austerity. So I'm actually hopeful that the whole austerity measure will collapse. But in the meantime, we do need to try and look after people the best we can. And one area I keep talking about is the local council tax support. We have a very poor scheme in Nuneaton where people have to pay the first 20%. And the way that scheme works, we're not getting value for money out of it. And as Councillor Harvey repeatedly says, we only keep 13% of the council tax. So if we had a more generous awarding of local council tax support, we would actually only have to pay for 13% of that extra benefit. So effectively, every pound we give to our residents in local council tax support, we only pay 13 pence of that as a council. It is really an area where we are actually cross-subsidising people in Stratford-upon-Avon, and whereas people in Nuneaton, because it's difficult to get money out of our local council tax support scheme, are effectively giving money to Stratford-upon-Avon. So it's a serious thing we need to look at again and again, and why Warwickshire doesn't have a common percentage for local council tax support, rather than this 20% at one council, 8% at another, 12% at the other, so that actually we have a fair system. Because the way it works is we are actually losing out, our poorest in our town are losing again, and the money effectively ends up being a surplus in the county council tax collection fund, which goes to places like Stratford. On the other point, we have an increasing problem with homelessness, particularly the young people, as the benefit changes are particularly affecting people, and the minimum wage. All the people under 25 are really being given a raw deal, and we really need to stand up for them and push the message up to government that these are our future generation, future people creating wealth, and they're being treated appallingly by the council's attack on the under 21s and under 25s. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just clarify what you said? The council's attack on the under 21?
Government's, I meant.
Oh, right, any questions? No? Thank you very much. Right, this report updates the Cabinet on the various welfare reform changes that have been implemented since 2012, which includes the spare room subsidy, the benefit cap and local council tax support. And more details are given in sections 4 to 7. Further welfare reforms have come into effect from April 2017, and further information is given on those in section 8. The most significant of these is the restriction of social sector housing benefit to local housing allowance rates, and the restriction on under 21s claiming for housing costs. Section 9 of the report discusses universal credit and the impact that moving to the next phase will have on residents in the borough from October 2017. In order to support our residents through the various welfare reform changes, the Council has expanded its financial inclusion support officer team, and more information on the work that this team do is given at section 10. And the recommendations to the report are shown at section 2. Any member? Councillor?
Chair, I'm pleased that we've had an update with this, because this is a real attack on residents in Nuneaton and Bedworth, and one that I think we rightly are very, very concerned about. I did meet actually with 2 of the 3 MPs for this borough recently to talk about the impact of some of the reforms on housing in particular. I hope the message may have got through, and we will see whether there are any changes in government legislation. But some of these new impositions of universal credit, which will hit us in 2018, are really causing hurt. And there is no easy solution. You can downsize. Well, you can downsize if there are properties available. If there aren't, you're stuck in this really invidious position of having to pay rent you can't afford and accruing arrears. This agenda clearly needs to change, and if there's anyone listening to us on YouTube when this is uploaded, I hope that the message will get across that the time has now ceased for increasingly targeting the very poorest in our borough. It needs to change, Chair.
Can I add, I would like to actually thank the team that is dealing with this and helping people, because I know that their help has been invaluable for quite a lot of people in the borough, and rather than attacking them as has been the case, and the way we've dealt with this, I think that we've dealt with it in a very caring way, and none of this is of our making, and it is something that our officers have tried their best to alleviate the worst aspects of. So thank you very much. Are we agreed then with the recommendations?
Fully agree.
Thank you. Item 8, Independent Remuneration Panel. I've got 3 speakers, Councillor Condaka, Councillor Wilson and Councillor Margrave. Not here at the minute. So, Councillor Condaka.
Thank you, Cabinet, again. I always appreciate the public funding good local councillors. I always understand that we need a good allowance to actually enable everyone to spend time being a councillor, and I have no issue with councillors getting a good basic allowance of, in our case, just under £5,000, if they're actually living in the borough and actually working for the borough rather than going off to Hull. One of the absolute things that we need, though, is for allowances to reflect the value of the work done. And one of the allowances I've always had a moan at is the chairs of Overview and Scrutiny Committee. These are political posts, and if you ever go to committee meetings, some chairs are better than others. But I believe £3,883 for chairing about 6 meetings a year is excessive. So that is something we need to look at, particularly because, unlike other councils, the chairs of Overview and Scrutiny are chosen by the ruling group and seem to be there to actually keep the council's interests rather than being champions of Overview and Scrutiny. Yeah, it should be a job very much as an apolitical job, which is actually helping backbenchers hold the council to account. One other thing that's dreadful is this broadband issue. Older councillors, or I should say older, but councillors who have been on the council for a longer period, are still getting free broadband. £20 a month or so it's costing the council, whereas newer councillors like myself and anyone elected in the last 6 years is not getting free broadband. There is no reason in this day for councillors to get free broadband. Everyone has broadband, everyone should pay for it. We also have this telephone allowance and IT allowance, which is totally OTT for the cost of modern telecom. Everything you need to do as a councillor, you can do on a phone with an £8 a month contract. Yeah, we should have a review of these things and see, do we really need to be spending £300 odd a month, a year, on our IT and phone allowances? Thank you, Chair.
I have a few questions for you, Councillor Condaka. First of all, you referred to, it's an apolitical job chairing the scrutiny. Could you tell me which councillor on this council is apolitical, as I actually believe they were all members of political parties?
It depends how they act. It's like mayors. There are some councillors who are very political as chairs of scrutiny, like the one who chaired the Housing Committee last year, who was going to have me chucked out the building for actually trying to talk about a petition about sheltered housing. That is not acceptable, and for him to be paid a very large allowance for chairing those meetings, I expect him to chair them in the interest of scrutiny and not in the interests of the party.
Councillor, I didn't ask you to slander people. I asked you which councillor was apolitical, and you. My second
slander is only if it's untrue.
My second question is, you appreciate the funding of the work done by councillors, and in this council, which councillors' allowances come out of the council tax, a councillor is paid as a basic allowance less than £5,000. Do you believe that as a county councillor, you do twice as much work at the county council, which comes out of the same council tax, and receive as a basic allowance, or last year £9,263, is that worth twice that of a borough councillor?
There are twice the number of borough councillors as there are county councillors. So the jobs are very similar, but obviously there's 2 councillors doing each borough council job and 1 doing each county council job. I actually personally do far more than £5,000 work as a borough councillor because I'm passionate about it.
And the rest of us don't. Is that the implication?
That is not the implication. I was saying what I do.
Thank you. So, I believe that what you were saying, well, the rest of us don't. But could I ask you, what is your view on the maximum amount of allowances that people should receive in terms of whether at this council or the county, it's all the same council tax in terms of special responsibility allowances? Is somebody out of Nuneaton and Bedworth's council tax worth £38,000?
the jobs depend upon how big a job and what responsibility it is. And if you look at jobs like the leader of Warwickshire County Council, it's running a £300 million a year business.
I believe that was the Chief Executive's job, but anyway. Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. The Independent Remuneration Panel, unfortunately I was unable to meet with the Chair directly because it was during the day meeting, so I sent a written submission. Having read and reflected on the report, this report is always going to be unpopular with members of the public because they don't like us politicians at the best of times. But I happen to believe, and as I always say to members who ask me, and I believe this to be across the political spectrum, if a councillor, and I believe most councillors here do their job properly, if you add up all the hours you do, it is nowhere near minimum wage for what we actually get as councillors. So I think this report is always going to be unpopular, but it's a difficult decision which needs to be done. In only 3 minutes, it's difficult to go through everything, but I think there are 3 key issues which I would like to highlight. One is, I do agree with the amount of the OSP chair's allowance being questioned, because when you divide by the average of 6 meetings a year, the allowance, it equates to roughly £630 per meeting. They get half the allowance roughly of a cabinet member. That isn't doing the same amount of work as a cabinet member, who I appreciate, regardless of party politics, has a very heavy job in running the services of the council alongside the officers. I think that one needs to have more careful consideration and potentially be reduced so it actually reflects more of the work which is done. Secondly is the issue of the Audit and Standards Committee, because this report is based on us when we had 2 separate committee meetings. I don't know what you're going to suggest about that because we haven't seen that tonight. I don't think it's as simple as adding the 2 recommendations together and dividing them by 2 or whatever. I think perhaps we ought to defer that particular one and that you should refer it back to the IRP for consideration, because I think that is something which needs to be looked at in greater detail. The third issue I want to look at is training, and I'm passionate about training because I'm a business skills coach at work. Training is essential in any walk of life, but I think they have taken a sledgehammer to crack a nut in this instance, because there was no, I don't remember in the consultation any suggestion about a training SRA hiving off £250. I think it needs more consideration. It's a good idea in principle, but how do you work it? Because if you're on regulatory committees, it's easier to get your training in because it's mandatory to have them. When you're on OSP, there is an OSP, or there was many years ago when I came onto the council, an OSP training session. That's not very much used to you guys as cabinet members because you're not on OSP, and we don't necessarily always do OSP the way it should be done, those of you who have done it. Furthermore, what is the use in an opposition member doing how to chair a committee meeting when, and I'm not going to get into the whys and wherefores of the situation of whether it's good or not, but the situation is you have the chairs of the committees. What is the point in us taking a committee, a training session on chairing a committee? I think this needs to go back to them to ask, or at the very least, refer it to an OSP for more scrutiny before it is introduced, to get some ideas about what the SRA entails and how it would work.
Thank you. Any questions to Councillor Wilson? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I come then, Councillor Margrave isn't here? No. To Councillor Pomfret.
Thank you, Chair. Well, this item really is to receive the recommendations of the panel, which are printed in their entirety within our papers. And there is a very good resume of the panel's recommendations on page 47. And really to boil it down even further, I would say that the 4 main things that the panel were recommending is the introduction of a training special responsibility allowance, make a nibble out of the basic allowance. It much encourages the use of the dependent carers allowance, who basically making its provision or making councillors members more aware of the existence of the scheme. Replacing the telephone allowance with the information and telecommunications allowance, and it re-establishes the indices used in indexing allowances. What I intend to do now, Chair, is just to run through as portfolio holder where my recommendations for council differ from those of the panel. So it would be perhaps useful to look at page 47. I'll only go through those recommendations where my recommendation is different from that of the panel. And if you want to raise any issues as we go along, I'm sure you'll be able to do that. So firstly, for the first recommendation, which is to do with the basic allowance and the training SRAs, my recommendation is that the basic allowance for 2016-2017 and the 1 SRA rule are maintained. Recommendation number 2 from the panel. My recommendation is that the Chair Licensing Committee allowance is maintained at the same level as the Chair Planning Committee, and the new combined post of Chair Audit and Standards Committee is maintained at the same level as the former Chair Audit Committee. The next 2 recommendations from the panel I suggest we leave as they are. Recommendation number 5. The ability for members to claim in-borough travel is maintained, and that the current approved duties, conditions and rates for which the travel and subsistence allowances may be claimed out with the borough are maintained. Recommendation number 6, that the provision to members of broadband and a BT telephone line to their homes be discontinued from municipal year starting in 2018, and that the telephone allowance is known as the communications allowance and is maintained at its 2016-2017 level. Finally, I think, recommendation number 7 from the panel basically stands as it is, except for one change, which is, sorry, I'm getting confused myself now. 8A is amended so that it says basic allowance SRAs and co-optees allowances are indexed to the annual percentage salary increase for local government staff at spinal column 49 as agreed each year by the National Joint Council for Local Government Services and applicable for the municipal year rather than the financial year. This is a percentage index only. It should not include any lump sum payable to officers. Indexation for 2017-2018 is delayed until the start of the municipal year in 2018. Thank you, Chair.
Is that those changes seconded?
Second those, Chair.
Could I just point out something? First of all, that many people who have been on this council for many years, including myself, do not get a broadband allowance because we chose to personally to discontinue that some considerable time ago, and I don't think it's appropriate for us to talk about which councillors do and which councillors don't at the moment, but many of us don't that allowance because we just use our own broadband at home. Could I also say that if we compare, basically being a councillor should not depend upon being wealthy. That's the situation of the 19th century. But equally, it should fairly recompense people for the job that they do, which is often over and above having to go to work, because on the rates we pay here, nobody could actually use that as their principal income. Unlike, I have to say, at the county, where I feel very strongly about this, I feel that some of these amounts paid are outrageous, because what you don't see is that in addition to these figures I mentioned earlier, that people who are then sent from there to the LGA, which is again our money, because all the councils contribute to the LGA, then get further allowances at the LGA on top of these allowances they're getting to be running the county. So, for instance, the leader of the county council is paid £16,381 a year for being the chair of the community wellbeing board at the LGA. Now, at the moment, there are no allowances, thank goodness, at the West Midlands Combined Authority. there are no payments being made, except I believe there will be one to the Mayor. And I will certainly oppose any payments being made to people who are given portfolio responsibility at the LGA, at the CA. Because what people do not see, the public do not see, they see the local level where allowances are very low, they don't see distance. So they often don't see what is being paid by the county council out of their council tax, and they certainly don't see what is being paid by the LGA, because I've had to print it off, and they don't see what could be at the CA. So I would very much oppose that. I find that it's not moral to be receiving more than £50,000 in allowances. That is not what people pay council tax for. It doesn't matter about the size of the budget, because we appoint people like the managing director, like directors and chief officers and chief executives to run the council. For instance, locally we have Rugby Conservative Control Council, where the council leader declares himself to be the leader and the chief executive. And in actual fact, they can't actually legally do the functions of the chief executive, but declares himself to be in such a case, so pays himself 23,000. Now that, to me, that's a smaller borough than Nuneaton and Bedworth. That is totally wrong. We have a situation where Hinckley, the leader, is on 19,000. Hinckley is much smaller than Nuneaton and Bedworth. The situation on council's allowances, in my opinion, should be a national one, and it should be a rate set nationally, not for people to be deciding huge amounts of money to be paid out of council tax. I believe I've never profited from council tax. In fact, for many years I had to pay it all back to my employer, Warwickshire County Council. So I actually made a big loss for many years, a direct loss. And I know many other people have done the same, because they cannot continue to fulfil all their commitments at work because they lose money with having time off. So I do think our allowances are quite low, but we don't grumble about them. I think it's very fair what we do here, but I do think that some of the allowances being paid elsewhere are appalling and should be highlighted, because I just think it's a situation which cannot be at all considered moral, to be taking this money from money that should be for services, particularly in councils which have slashed services to the bone. Well, we've got a recommendation from Councillor Pomfret.
Can I just add that these recommendations, the implementation of them, once they have approval, should be implemented from basically the start of this municipal year, 17th of May. So backdated.
Okay, because, yes, yeah. Okay. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay. Not getting any more money out of it. So that's all agreed by the Cabinet. Thank you very much. Item 9 is in fact a recommendation from overview and scrutiny. Do we have the chair here, or Shirley, do you want?
I should have said, Chair, at the beginning of the meeting that Jill Shepherd gave her apologies for not being able to attend tonight. She's not very well.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want to take questions first, or do you want me to?
Are there any comments or questions to be made on this? Are we happy with what's being put forward?
No speakers.
There's no speakers, no.
That's fine. So this is a report on the Select Committee's review of the allotment strategy 2012 to 2022. As part of that strategy, they were asked to review it at a 5-year period, and also there were some issues that came up as a result. So back in 2012, a scrutiny review was undertaken by the Planning and Environment OSP to assist in the formulation of the allotment strategy and to move wholly over to the self-management arrangement that had been envisaged for allotments some years earlier. As part of that work, the allotment associations were consulted throughout, and an agreement was made that in order to take on self-management in the wider sense, they would need to be able to access grant funding. In order to do this, the allotment associations requested that council grant them a 25-year lease. In 2013, the allotment strategy was approved, and this included the granting of 25-year leases. By 2016, the Nuneaton allotment associations had all signed their leases and moved forward with their own action plans and funding bids. It became apparent to the Planning and Environment OSP that this was not the case for the Bedworth allotment associations, as only one association had signed the lease. The OSP invited them to come into a meeting and heard from the Bedworth allotment associations that there were some issues that they wanted to address before they would sign their leases. The OSP therefore agreed to set up a select committee to hear what those issues were and to move the allotment associations towards the signing of the leases. The findings and recommendations of that select committee are in the report in front of you, and they were approved to come to Cabinet by the OSP in April. I can update you on the current situation. The Chair is pleased to advise you that the Council has now received 6 signed Bedworth Allotment Association leases, which leaves only 3 outstanding at this time, and I understand that we hope to receive them shortly. However, the recommendations within this report were made in case it was necessary to bring the situation to a conclusion, and the OSP would ask Cabinet to agree those put forward.
Thank you. Councillor Lloyd?
Yeah, well, firstly I'd like to commend the Scrutiny Committee for the excellent work that was done, because I have been following it. I've had meetings with Councillor Shepherd, and she's kept me informed all the way along the way. It has been a hard task, it's been a long slog, but to be in a situation where you say there's 6 that have signed up, I understand that maybe 7, but you know, they've all committed to move on. The issue I think that raised from the scrutiny, there was issues with the boundaries. Obviously, with some very mature trees in those boundaries, some people had concerns that if they took over self-management, the cost of felling a tree, etc., if it got struck by lightning or an emergency, anything would break the association. So what was done was a covering letter, which I thought was an excellent piece of work. That's what came out of it, to actually protect the associations with that part on the boundaries. As I say, it's been a long slog. The grant funding is very important because with self-management, it does enable them to tap into more money than what the council can tap into. So it gives them the opportunity to move their allotments forward and actually get an awful lot more done than what we could do as a council with the restraints of funding at the moment. As again, it's an excellent piece of work, and commend the whole subcommittee and the committee that worked on this, because without working together with the allotmentees in Bedworth, this wouldn't have been able to been achieved. So a very good piece of work, and for me, I will be recommending all the recommendations within this report.
Thank you. Are we agreed then with that? Move forward.
Yes, Chair.
Item 10, there have been no other items put forward. Item 11, exclusion of the press and public due to the consideration of the following item being exempt information.
Move that, Chair.
That agreed?
Secondary.
Thank you very much.